Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Dennis Heil, and I am diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder with severe depression and high functioning autism. I've been living with bipolar disorder for over 30 years, 15 of which I spent undiagnosed. In 2009, I experienced a depressive psychotic break that led to my diagnosis of type 2 bipolar disorder. I would be diagnosed with autism a few years later. In my podcast, Bluntly Bipolar, I'm going to share with you my experiences and the hard lessons I've learned trying to find some peace and happiness in my life. I hope that by sharing my experiences, others can avoid learning these lessons the hard way. I'm not a mental health professional. All I am is a mental patient with a microphone. Listener discretion is advised. Do you remember Elisa Lam? Back in 2013, she was found dead in a cistern on top of the Stay on Main Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Eliza was 21 years old, Canadian, and a student at the University of British Columbia, although she was not registered at the start of 2013. Eliza's death drew a lot of attention and conspiracy theories, which were fueled by the internet and public due to the strange circumstances surrounding her death. The last known footage of Eliza was her in an elevator, behaving strangely. She hit several floor buttons, acted like she was hiding in a corner to avoid being seen, had strange body language, and she regularly kept poking her head out and stepping in and out of the elevator as though she were looking for someone. The internet speculated that she was being followed and that someone had victimized her and stuffed her into the water tank on the roof of the hotel. Now, at the time, I was pretty heavily into mystery and conspiracy content, and the Elisa Lam case had a lot of attention. But what I didn't find out until just a few years ago is that Elisa Lam also had bipolar disorder. Not only did Eliza have bipolar disorder, but in the weeks leading up to her death, she did things that you should absolutely not do when you have bipolar disorder. Any one of these things could be devastating on its own without the proper care and management, but she did several things that very well could have came together to amplify her mental unwellness and led to this tragedy. Now, the first of these things was her time at university. First of all, college is very stressful for most people. In our personal blog, she lamented that she was far behind her peers because she had been forced to withdraw from so many classes due to her mental health. Apparently, she was on her fourth year of trying to get through her freshman year of college. The second of these things is that she was not consistent with her psych meds. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression and was prescribed Lamictal, Seroquel, Effexor, and Wellbutrin to manage it. According to toxicology reports, she had extremely low levels of all of her medication in her blood. Not only that, but she was found to have too much of her medications left in her personal belongings in her hotel room. This combination of factors led investigators to conclude that she had not been taking her medication as directed. Homicide detective Tim Marcia learned from her family that Eliza had a bad habit of not taking her medications, and that it had happened on several occasions. And when it happened, she would have relapses, hallucinations, and delusions, and often hide under her bed for safety. On one occasion, her unwellness was so severe it resulted in an inpatient stay. Now, I don't know if I would say that it's a common behavior with folks with bipolar disorder, but I have known more than a few people who would back off their doses at times to clear their head or to get a wider emotional range back. It most commonly happens around times when a person wants to feel everything, like if they're going on a trip or going to a concert or something along those lines. But I don't know why she decided to do what she did. All I'm saying is that the behavior is consistent with the folks who struggle with acceptance and compliance, and they don't realize how dangerous that it is for them. Now, in the days leading up to her death, she had traveled from Canada to Los Angeles. She was reported to have behaved erratically by getting herself removed from a taping of the Conan O'Brien show for causing a public disturbance. Many of these details didn't make it to the public at the time, and it fueled numerous conspiracies surrounding her death. Even after the information did come out, some people still perpetuate the idea that foul play occurred, even though there's no evidence to support that. She was not found to have been assaulted or sexually assaulted. She did not have defensive wounds from defending herself, nor was there any evidence to indicate that she had fought to not be put into the water tank. Investigators concluded that she accidentally drowned. Based on the evidence, they believe she was having a psychiatric crisis related to bipolar disorder. Investigators believe that she had a psychotic break and was suffering from paranoia, went to the roof to hide from whatever her mind was telling her to be afraid of, climbed into an unlocked water tank, undressed due to paradoxical undressing from hypothermia, or to make it easier to tread water, couldn't get back out of the tank, and accidentally drowned. It's really unfortunate how her death was treated like a circus for such a long time, because there's a lot to be learned from the truth. The most important of which is how important it is to take your medication as directed. And if the side effects are too bad to manage or live with, to talk to your doctor about alternatives. Not taking it as directed means it will not be working the way it's supposed to be. It can cause extreme problems like psychotic breaks and severe unwell cycles. It can make your symptoms much worse. And psychosis doesn't just put the mentally ill person at risk. The person in crisis may take steps to defend themselves depending on what they believe. That can lead to dangerous decisions and attempts to defend themselves from threats that the mental illness is manufacturing. And it's worth pointing out that most mentally ill people are not a danger to anyone other than themselves, but psychosis brings a lot of risks with it. The second thing is that she put herself under constant stress for not being able to keep up in school and perform like her peers. She wrote about this in her blog. Stress management is such an important part of mood regulation for those of us with mood disorders that she was constantly beating herself up for not being able to live up to the same standard of her peers. She felt behind, aimless, and like she was off course because she couldn't perform at the level she wanted to in college. I will also note that even though she was of Chinese descent, some have assumed the racist stereotype that she was pressured by her family over her education. It doesn't appear that was the case. She herself was regularly worried that she was losing out and missing out on life by not having the ability to function like everyone else, like normal people. She tried to hold herself to a standard she wasn't able to meet, and that likely fueled her instability. And lastly, she traveled from Vancouver to Los Angeles for a trip. Travel is a common trigger for bipolar and wellness. It's stressful to travel. You have the busyness of airports, making sure everything is running according to schedule, and all the planning that goes into it, not to mention the anticipation and excitement. Now, as far as I'm aware, Vancouver and Los Angeles are both in the Pacific time zone. So crossing time zones wasn't a factor, but it can be another major bipolar trigger. Sleep is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle of mental health management. A bipolar person who travels and crosses time zones may experience severe illness as they get thrown off their circadian rhythm. And if you have bipolar disorder and you've been a traveler, you may be able to look back on your life to see times around or after your travels when you were unstable. It happens often. Now, when you take all these things together and you throw them in a brain and stir them, it's no wonder she most likely had a psychotic break. That mixture is a pressure cooker that is basically primed to go off. Does that mean you can't travel, that you can't do things, that you can't pursue education? No, not at all. Instead, what you need to do is account for these things and have backup plans in place. If you plan around them, you can intercept unwellness before it gets bad, or you can avoid it altogether. It is vital to take psych medication as directed, if you're going to take it. It's not unusual for people with bipolar disorder to back off their doses at a time to feel the full spectrum of their emotions. Psych medication can blunt your healthy emotions. It can also do things like cause physical exhaustion, which can be impossible to maintain if you have to work or have a child. But underdosing can also be problematic because you can accidentally find yourself on more meds than you actually need. And it can't work the way it's supposed to if there's not enough of it in your blood. So let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say I'm underdosing Lamictal for depression. I go in for my appointment. My doctor asks me how I'm doing. I say I still feel depressed, but I do not inform them I haven't been properly taking my meds over the past few weeks. Maybe I feel ashamed because why do I have to take this medication to be like other people? I don't want to have to, so I don't. But the doctor says, all right, let's try you on another med or increases the dosage. Now, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, why would anyone do that? Now, there are more reasons than people realize, you know? Some people don't feel comfortable advocating for themselves. Others don't want to disappoint the professionals and feel like they're letting them down. Then you have people who just don't understand the gravity of what they're doing. They don't think it's important, so they don't mention it. A lot of people treat their psych medications very flippantly, whereas I prefer to think of my psych medications like a loaded gun. It's a powerful tool, but it can be harmful if it's not used correctly. And it happens a lot. In fact, it happens so often that the phrase I've used most regularly when talking to my peers is, have you told your doctor what you just told me? Because you really need to. That's easily the most commonly used phrase that I have. Now, the next thing she could have done was requested accommodations with her school. There doesn't appear to be any public record of her having special accommodations, but Canada does recognize bipolar disorder as a disability. Given the cocktail she was on and the symptoms she's known to have experienced, it's quite likely she would have been granted accommodations. She wrote on her blog that she was ashamed of her inability to handle school and dropped several classes to navigate a mental health relapse. Again, we have unnecessary stress that she put on herself by trying to hold herself to the standard of a mentally healthy person. If she had accommodations, she may have been able to find a different way to navigate her education without tearing herself down in the process. But it's hard to get someone who can't accept that they aren't like mentally healthy people to take that step. Pride is another big factor, particularly if you're a highly functional mentally ill person. Hypomania and mania, before it gets to an unmanageable level, can sometimes cause us to be high performers. So asking for accommodations or medicating that away can be a difficult proposition. Some people view it as giving up their superpower, although I've always disagreed with the idea of mania as a superpower. To me, that's like saying, I'm going to smoke crystal meth and then the energy that I have is my superpower. You're still getting high. It's just your own supply. And it's still damaging and harmful because every time you have an unwell cycle, you are basically injuring your brain. So another common conversation you see in bipolar circles are the people who want to preserve the good parts of their hypomania or mania while avoiding the bad parts. It doesn't work that way because it's all bad, even though it may feel amazing or make you amazingly productive. Every unwell cycle we have today is paving the way for more severe unwell cycles tomorrow. In my mind, it's like saying, I want to be high on crystal meth because it feels amazing, but I don't want to suffer any of the downsides to it or the potential for addiction. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. And the same thing is true for euphoria or for bipolar folks who happen to be high achievers because of the intensity and lack of sleep. You don't get to pick and choose. It's all or nothing. It's situations like these why I say that I'm not normal, that I'm not like mentally healthy people. I'm not normal as in I'm not typical, and I cannot conduct my life in the same way as a mentally healthy person does and expect to have a good outcome. But there are accommodations that can be had to help people like myself, Eliza, and other mentally ill people succeed that we should use. Now, travel is the final major point. Major stress is a common trigger for bipolar instability. Travel, marriage, and moving are three of the biggest stressors that average people will experience in their life, and all of them can be destabilizing. That does not mean that you need to avoid these things. Instead, you want to plan around them. These are some steps that I would take. The first thing I would do is make sure my meds are current and that I will have enough for the trip. Instead of solo travel, it might be a better idea to travel with a trusted friend who can keep an eye on you, or have regular check-ins with loved ones to make sure you're balanced. Let them know where you're going to be and when, so that they can tell when something is wrong. I would pay close attention to my moods while I was traveling. In general, I'm at a point in my own recovery where I just check in on my moods for a few minutes every few weeks. My bipolar disorder is pretty consistently in mild depression, so mood journaling and tracking didn't do a whole lot for me overall. But if I'm exposing myself to regular stress, I'd be considering my moods twice a day, when I wake up and before I go to bed. I ask questions like, am I sleeping okay? Am I having racing thoughts? Is my personality changing from what I would typically expect? Am I more angry and volatile? Am I more paranoid and suspicious? What other symptoms are there? And am I experiencing any of them right now? What is my mental state as compared to a month ago, 3 months ago? I examine my moods over a longer period of time because mood disorder unwell cycles tend to function in weeks and months, unless you're rapid cycling. Now, I would continue asking myself these questions for at least 2 weeks after I returned from the trip. If I detect something, I may seek out a med adjustment or continue to do non-medication related management until I fall off completely. If I didn't, then I would conclude that I'm not going to swing and get back into my regular groove of life. The trip back home would be another session of traveling, which means more stress, which means more potential for unwellness. The trip home can be triggering itself, and you can certainly be hit by an unwell cycle from traveling home after the fact. Now, personally, I hate that so many people try to convince us that we can do things like everyone else, even though we have a mental illness, a severe mental illness at that. The truth is far different. I can't live my life like someone without bipolar disorder and have a good outcome. Eliza's story is a stark reminder that bipolar disorder doesn't care about your intelligence or potential. If I'm not aware of my limits and respect them, it can have devastating consequences, some of which I've experienced myself through suicide attempts and other destructive actions. I think it's a comforting lie that we're told because it sounds good, and a lot of people saying it just don't know any better. And I don't blame them. How would you really know that unless you went out of your way to learn it? So, if you have bipolar disorder, be aware that stressful situations are probably the most common triggers that we are regularly exposed to. College, work, marriage, travel, and moving can all be catalysts for severe unwellness. Take your meds as directed, ask for accommodations if you don't feel like you can perform without them, and hopefully you can keep building a gainful, meaningful life that makes sense for you. Eliza never had that chance because she just didn't know any better. And it's not her fault she didn't know. And it's not your fault if you didn't know either. But if you didn't know before, now you do. So be safe out there. Take your meds as directed. And if you can't or won't, talk to your doctor about it. Thank you for your time. Don't forget to hit follow and share this with someone who might help. Please leave an honest rating or review on your platform of choice. It'll help me reach more people.